Monica stared at the smart home control panel as the numbers on the thermostat spun upward like a runaway stopwatch. 95, 105, 115 degrees. The air became a thick, humid weight, smelling of ozone and melting plastic, while every electronic deadbolt in the house fired in a rhythmic, mechanical clack, clack, clack. Just as the lights surged to a blinding white intensity and shattered, showering the carpet with glass, she lunged for the dining room window. Through a sliver in the descending steel shutters, she saw a black sedan idling in the rain, its headlights flickering twice in a silent, predatory salute. The police arrived to find a tomb of perfect normalcy. The temperature was a crisp 72 degrees. The sirens were silent, and every lock functioned perfectly. They didn't see the grainy, night vision footage hidden in a new file on her laptop. Video of her own sleeping face, filmed from a camera inside her smoke detector that shouldn't exist. As the officers shared a dismissive look, Monica realized the person who had turned her house into a pressurized cage wasn't just watching her. They were rewriting her reality, one line of code at a time. The heavy, metallic scent of cooling coffee hung in the kitchen, a bitter companion to the leaden weight pressing against Monica Caldwell's eyelids. Across the table, Leo sat in a pool of early morning light that felt too bright, too clinical for the state of her nerves. He was meticulously fishing soggy cereal rings from his bowl, his movements mechanical, his gaze fixed on the milk's surface rather than his mother. Monica reached out, her fingers trembling slightly from the third night of overtime at the cybersecurity firm, wanting to brush back a stray tuft of his hair. Before her hand could make contact, Leo shifted. It wasn't a flinch, not exactly, but a subtle leaning away that felt like a physical blow to her chest. "The math test today," she said, her voice sounding like gravel grinding against silk. "You ready for it?" Leo shrugged, the motion small and indifferent. "I guess." He didn't look up. The kitchen clock, a minimalist circle on the white wall, hammered out the seconds with agonizing precision. Every tick seemed to vibrate through the soles of her feet, echoing the hum of the server fans that still rang in her ears. She tried to manufacture a smile, something to bridge the growing chasm between them. But her facial muscles felt frozen, a mask of exhaustion that wouldn't crack. A sharp, impatient honk from the driveway shattered the fragile silence. Monica winced, the sound lancing through her headache. She fumbled for her keys, nearly dropping them as Leo stood up with a suddenness that rattled his spoon against the ceramic bowl. He shouldered his backpack in one fluid motion and vanished toward the door without a second glance. Outside, the air was damp with the remnants of an Illinois spring rain. Mark stood leaning against his obsidian-black SUV, the vehicle's polished surface reflecting the suburban perfection of Naperville like a taunt. He checked his watch, the silver casing catching the sun, and smoothed a cuff that was already impeccably crisp. He looked like a man who hadn't spent his night chasing ghosts in a sea of malicious code. As Leo climbed into the back seat, Mark stepped toward Monica, his eyes raking over her wrinkled blouse and the dark, bruised circles beneath her green eyes. "You look tired, Monica," he said, his voice a low, melodic purr that set her teeth on edge. "Worn out, frayed at the edges. I imagine the court-appointed evaluators will find this particular look very telling." Monica's fingernails bit into her palms, the sharp sting of the crescent-shaped marks the only thing keeping her upright. "Get off my property, Mark." He offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. "Soon, very soon, the property won't be the only thing you're losing." He didn't wait for a rebuttal. The SUV pulled away with a soft, expensive growl, leaving Monica alone on the driveway. She retreated inside, the silence of the house now feeling predatory. She needed sleep, real, dreamless sleep, to reset the logic gates of her brain. She stumbled into the bedroom, dragging the heavy blackout curtains shut until the room was plunged into artificial twilight. She collapsed onto the bed, her boots still on, the cold sheets offering a momentary reprieve. The darkness lasted less than an hour. A piercing, high-pitched electronic shriek tore through the quiet. Monica bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The smart home control panel on the wall was glowing a toxic neon blue, the screen flickering with a system update notification she hadn't authorized. Before she could reach for it, the sound of rushing water erupted from the kitchen. The faucet had turned itself on, the pipes groaning under the sudden pressure. She grabbed her phone, her thumb sliding over the glass. Notifications were cascading down the screen like a waterfall. Master bedroom window, unlocked. Back door, unlocked. Garage entry, unlocked. "No," she whispered, her voice lost in the rising cacophagous of the house. The security siren exploded. It wasn't a standard alarm. It was a wall of sound, a physical force that vibrated in her marrow, designed to disorient and terrify. Monica scrambled toward the front door, her breath coming in ragged hitches. She grabbed the handle, but it was dead. The electronic bolt had engaged, refusing to recognize her biometric override. She threw her shoulder against the wood, the impact jarring her teeth. But the door remained a solid, unyielding part of the wall. Red LEDs on the motion sensors began to strobe, flashing in a rhythmic, hypnotic pattern that turned the hallway into a staccato nightmare. She heard the dry, mechanical clack, clack, clack of every deadbolt in the house firing in sequence. She was being sealed in. The lights in the living room began a frantic dance, surging to a blinding, white-hot intensity before plunging into pitch black. Monica pressed her hands over her ears, the smell of ozone and hot plastic filling the air as light bulbs began to pop, showering the carpet with glass. The thermostat display caught her eye. The numbers were spinning upward with impossible speed. 85, 95, 110 degrees. The heat became a physical weight, thick and humid. The radiators began to hiss and clank, the metal expanding under the sudden surge of boiling water. Monica felt the sweat slicking her skin, her lungs laboring in the thinning oxygen. The automatic steel shutters on the windows began to descend with a heavy, industrial rumble, cutting off the last sliver of the morning sun. Desperate, she threw herself toward the window in the dining room, catching the shutter just before it hit the sill. She pried a gap between the metal slats, pressing her forehead against the glass, seeking the cool touch of the exterior world. Across the street, parked perfectly parallel to her gate, sat a low-slung black sedan. Its engine was idling, a thin plume of gray exhaust curling into the rain-slicked air. The windows were tinted a deep, impenetrable charcoal. Monica watched, her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her ears as the car's headlights flicked on and off twice. A signal, a mockery. Then she saw it. The dull glass glint of a long-range lens protruding slightly from the driver's side window, aimed directly at her. The watcher didn't move. He didn't flee. He simply sat there, documenting her panic. Her fingers shook as she dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was a tinny, distant thing against the roar of the siren. "I'm trapped. Someone has taken control of my house. There's a car outside." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the rhythmic blue and red of a patrol car crested the hill. The moment the light touched the wet pavement, the black sedan lunged forward. Its tires didn't even chirp. It simply vanished into the network of side streets with the practiced grace of a shadow. When the officers finally breached the door, the house was a tomb of perfect normalcy. The siren had cut out seconds before they arrived. The lights were steady, the temperature a crisp 72 degrees. The senior officer, a man with a tired face and a badge that had seen better decades, looked at Monica's disheveled hair and the way her hands wouldn't stop twitching. He didn't look at the popped light bulbs. He looked at the half-empty bottle of wine on the counter from 3 nights ago. "Everything seems to be in working order, Ms. Caldwell," he said, his tone dripping with the forced patience one uses with the unstable. "Maybe the storm caused a surge. You should get some rest. Naperville is a safe place. No one's hacking your toaster." He shared a look with his partner, a look that said, "Another tech worker breakdown," and they left. Monica stood in the center of her living room, the silence now heavier than the noise had been. She didn't go to bed. She went to her desk. The laptop screen flickered to life, its familiar glow a small comfort. But as the OS loaded, a red flag appeared in the corner of her security dashboard. A new file sat in the encrypted vault. She opened it, and her heart seemed to stop. It was a video. Grainy night vision footage. It was her. She was sleeping, tossing in the throes of a nightmare, the blankets kicked to the floor. The angle was impossible. It was coming from the smoke detector directly above her bed. The footage cut to her waking up, her face a mask of primal terror as the alarm started, her desperate scramble for the door. Someone hadn't just watched her. They had violated the very sanctity of her skin. Her fingers began to fly, a blur of motion as she opened the terminal. She wasn't just a victim. She was the woman who had written the encryption protocols for 3-letter agencies. She dove into the system logs, stripping away the layers of obfuscation. The intruder was good, surgical even, but they had left a signature. The encryption method used to mask the data exfiltration was a derivative of a polymorphic code she herself had pioneered. It was a thumbprint, a taunt. "Mark," she whispered. The name a curse. She traced the signal, hopping through a dozen proxies until she hit a hard wall. But there, buried in the handshake protocol, was a digital certificate linked to a private firm. Vanguard Digital Solutions. She knew them. They were the fixers for the ultra-wealthy, the ones who made sure divorces went the right way by ensuring one party looked like a monster. She dug deeper, her eyes burning. She found the transaction logs, a trail of breadcrumbs leading from a shell company Mark used for his real estate holdings directly to the firm. It was all there. The plan to simulate a mental breakdown, the documentation of her instability, the systematic stripping of her life. Morning arrived with a cold, gray light. Monica headed to the office, her mind a sharpened blade. She needed the high-speed array at work to crack the final layer of Vanguard's server. But when she reached the glass and steel monolith of her firm, her badge didn't beep. The LED turned a flat, angry red. A hand, heavy and smelling of stale tobacco, dropped onto her shoulder. "Monica, step away from the gate." It was the head of security, a man who had shared coffee with her a week ago. Now, he looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. He handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a formal notice of suspension. "The internal audit found your signature on a data dump to a server in the Caymans, Monica. Sensitive defense protocols. We have to escort you off the premises." "I didn't do it. Look at the timestamps. I was—" "Save it for the lawyers," he said, his voice flat. He stepped into her path, his massive frame blocking the elevators. She was being erased. She drove toward Mark's house, the desperation a physical ache. She needed to see Leo. She needed to tell him she wasn't the woman Mark was painting her to be. But as she pulled onto the manicured street, she saw them. Mark, standing on the lawn with a man in a charcoal suit, his lawyer, and Leo, standing between them, his backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. The lawyer stepped forward as Monica scrambled out of her car. He held out a document with a heavy gold seal. "Temporary restraining order, Miss Caldwell. Given the evidence of your recent episodes, the court has granted Mr. Caldwell full custody pending a psychiatric evaluation." "No!" Monica lunged forward, but Mark caught Leo by the shoulder, steering him toward the SUV. "Mom?" Leo's voice was small, cracked with a fear that shattered her. "Leo, I'm here. Mark, you lying son of a—" Mark didn't even look at her. He shoved Leo into the back seat, the child's hands pressing against the glass as the child screamed her name, a muffled sound that would haunt her forever. Mark climbed into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. "This is for his safety, Monica," Mark said through the cracked window, his voice devoid of anything resembling humanity. "You're sick. Get help." The SUV surged away. Monica dove back into her car, her tires screaming as she pursued them onto the I-88. The speedometer climbed, 70, 80, 95. She was gaining on them, her eyes fixed on Mark's taillights. Then, the world turned white. A pair of high-intensity xenon beams erupted in her rearview mirror. The black sedan was back, appearing as if from the pavement itself. It slammed into her rear bumper, a jolt that sent a shockwave up her spine. She gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, as the sedan pulled alongside her. The driver was a shadow behind tinted glass. He nudged her car, a calculated professional pit maneuver. The screech of tearing metal filled the cabin as her car began to fishtail. To the right, a steep embankment led down into a ravine choked with old growth oak and brambles. She fought the wheel, her muscles screaming. The sedan hit her again, harder this time. The back end of her car broke loose. She saw the concrete barrier rushing toward her, then the world inverted. She wasn't sure how long she sat in the silence that followed. The smell of hot coolant and spilled gasoline was thick. She was hung in her seatbelt, the car tilted at a precarious 45-degree angle in the ditch. Above her, on the shoulder of the highway, the black sedan slowed to a crawl. The window rolled down just an inch. A moment of observation, then it accelerated away, leaving her in the dirt. Monica kicked the door open, the metal groaning. She tumbled out into the mud, her forehead slick with blood. She reached for her phone, her last tether to the world. The screen flickered. A logo appeared, then a single line of text. "Device permanently disabled by administrator." She was in a dead zone, 5 miles from the nearest house, with no money, no phone, and a reputation that was being incinerated by a script she couldn't stop. She began to walk. The industrial district on the edge of Naperville was a wasteland of rusted, corrugated iron and cracked asphalt. Monica moved through the shadows, her breath coming in ragged plumes. She found a 24-hour convenience store, the neon sign buzzing like a dying insect. Inside, she went straight to the ATM. PIN accepted. Processing. Then, account frozen. Contact fraud department. The machine spat out a receipt. Balance 0.0. She felt a laugh bubbling up in her throat, a jagged, hysterical sound. Mark hadn't just taken her son. He had taken her ability to exist in a capitalist society. She found an internet cafe nearby, a dark hole that smelled of burnt dust and old cigarettes. She used her last few coins to buy 30 minutes of access. She logged into her personal email, only to find a disaster. Hundreds of emails had been sent from her account in the last 2 hours. They were addressed to her clients, her bosses, the Department of Defense. They were filled with incoherent rants, racial slurs, and threats of violence. The script was still running. It was a scorched earth protocol. She tried to type a counter-command, a kill switch she had built into her personal server, but the screen suddenly turned blue. A system-level wipe was initiated. The computer in the cafe groaned and died. She stepped back out into the night. The air was colder now. She made her way to her house, hoping to find something, anything, to use as a weapon. But as she turned the corner, she saw the flashing lights again. Not one car this time, 3, and a black van with FBI stenciled on the side. "Monica Caldwell," a voice boomed through a megaphone. "We have a warrant for your arrest for cyber terrorism and the theft of classified defense data. Come out with your hands up." They weren't just coming for her child. They were coming for her life. She didn't wait. She turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows of the neighbor's overgrown garden. She crawled through the dirt, the thorns of the rose bushes tearing at her clothes, until she reached the back alley. She ran until her lungs burned, until the sound of the sirens was a distant hum. She found herself in front of a derelict office building, a place she hadn't seen in a decade. It was the site of her first startup, a failed venture from before Mark, before the world had turned cold. The windows were boarded up, but she knew the service entrance in the back had a faulty latch. Inside, the air was stagnant, heavy with the ghosts of old ambitions. She climbed to the 4th floor, her boots echoing on the bare concrete. In a storage closet, under a pile of moth-eaten cables, she found it. An old tough book, a ruggedized engineering laptop she had used for field testing. It was ancient, slow, and most importantly, completely disconnected from any network. She powered it on. The screen flickered with a dull, low-res glow. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, just a raw, unadulterated terminal. "Okay, Mark," she whispered, her fingers finding their rhythm. "Let's play." She spent the next hour building a localized mesh network, using a high-gain antenna she scavenged from a discarded router. She tapped into the city's municipal Wi-Fi, but she didn't just log on. She created a ghost. She wrote a script that looped the footage of every security camera in a 3-block radius, showing a perfectly empty street. To the world, she didn't exist. She began to probe the Vanguard servers again. Now that she was off the main grid, she could see the back doors they were using. She saw the handoff. Mark wasn't just paying them. He was communicating with a specific operative, a man named Hatcher. A sound from below froze her blood. The heavy thud of a door being kicked open. She checked her radio frequency scanner. A high-powered signal was moving through the building. Someone was using a thermal imager. She grabbed the tough book and moved. She couldn't leave, but she could hide. She slipped into the old server room, a forest of empty racks and tangled wires. She found the main power junction and bypassed the breaker. Suddenly, the room came alive, with 100 tiny, blinking status lights. Remnants of the old hardware she had left behind. In the dark, it was a kaleidoscope of false positives. She climbed onto a ventilation duct, pulling herself into the shadows just as the door creaked open. A man entered. He was dressed in a slate-gray tactical jacket, a tablet held in one hand, a suppressed pistol in the other. He moved with the terrifying economy of a professional. He scanned the room, the thermal imager on his tablet struggling to differentiate between the heat of the old electronics and a human body. He stepped closer to her hiding spot. Monica didn't breathe. She waited until he was directly beneath her, his attention focused on a flickering LED on the far rack. She dropped. She hit him with the full weight of her desperation. They crashed to the floor in a cloud of dust and shattered plastic. The man was fast, faster than any civilian. He caught her wrist, his grip like a vice, and slammed her against a server rack. A sharp edge of steel sliced through her jacket, biting deep into her shoulder. Pain exploded in her vision, but she didn't scream. She reached out, her fingers closing around a heavy power cable. She whipped it around his neck, pulling with every ounce of strength she had left. He thrashed, his boots drumming against the concrete. She grabbed a heavy lead-acid battery from the floor and swung it with a primal grunt. It caught him in the temple. He went limp. Monica collapsed against the rack, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her shoulder was warm, slick with blood. She ignored it. She searched his pockets and found an encrypted smartphone. She opened the messages. There, at the top, was a video file from Mark. She hit play. It was Leo. He was in a small, windowless room with brick walls. He was sitting on a dirty mattress, his face red from crying. "Dad, please," he was saying. "I want to go home. I want my mom." Mark's voice came from off-camera. "You don't have a mom anymore, Leo. She's gone. She didn't want you." The rage that surged through Monica was unlike anything she had ever felt. It wasn't the cold, analytical anger of a coder. It was the heat of a dying sun. She saw the metadata on the file. It was being sent from the old winery on Mark's estate. She looked at the phone's calendar. Final custody hearing, 10 a.m. She had 2 hours. She plugged the phone into her toughbook. The encryption was formidable, but she had the operative's private key now. She didn't just break in. She took over. She found the kill switch Mark had used to frame her. She didn't delete it. She rerouted it. She wrote a piece of code that would execute the moment the evidence was presented in court. It was a digital truth serum. It would strip away the faked signatures and reveal the origin of every packet of data. Mark's private IP. But first, she had to get to Leo. She took the operative's motorcycle from the alley, a matte black beast that roared to life under her touch. She ignored the agony in her shoulder, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy. She rode like a woman possessed, weaving through the morning traffic of Naperville, a shadow among the minivans and commuter sedans. She reached the estate and didn't bother with the gate. She drove the bike through the decorative hedge, the branches clawing at her face. She slid the bike to a halt in front of the winery. Mark was there. He was loading bags into his SUV. He looked up, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You should have stayed in the ditch, Monica." He lunged at her. He was larger, stronger, but she had nothing left to lose. They hit the ground, a tangle of limbs and fury. Mark's hands closed around her throat, his thumbs pressing into her windpipe. "I'm going to finish what your mother started," he hissed. Monica felt the world beginning to gray at the edges. She reached out, her hand finding a heavy glass wine bottle on a nearby crate. She shattered it against his head. He fell back, dazed. She didn't stop. She scrambled toward the SUV, grabbing his phone from the center console. She didn't just lock the car. She engaged the emergency lockdown protocol she had found in his files. The doors sealed, the windows rolled up. Mark was trapped inside his own fortress of luxury. She ran to the wine cellar, her heart in her throat. "Leo! Leo!" She found the heavy wooden door. It was locked with a digital keypad. She didn't have the code. She didn't need it. She used the operative's phone to trigger a master reset. The bolt slid back. Leo was there, huddled in the corner. He looked up, his eyes wide. "Mom? I've got you, baby. I've got you." She pulled him into her arms. The scent of him, soap and sweat and childhood. the only thing that mattered. The sirens were close now. Real sirens. She had used the operative's phone to send a 911 alert with the coordinates and the video of Leo's kidnapping. The police arrived. But this time, they weren't looking at her. They were looking at the man screaming behind the glass of the SUV. They were looking at the blood on her shoulder and the child in her arms. The courtroom was a cathedral of silence. The judge, a woman with eyes like flint, watched as the evidence was projected onto the screen. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The red lines of the faked code began to dissolve, replaced by a map of data points. A single pulsing red dot appeared in the center of the map. Origin: Mark Caldwell. Residence: private server. The collective gasp of the room was the sweetest sound Monica had ever heard. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, her voice a death knell, "I believe you have some explaining to do." The aftermath was a blur of depositions and hospital visits. But 3 days later, Monica sat in her living room. The house was hers again. The smart home system was gone, replaced by simple mechanical locks and a security system she had built herself. Line by grueling line, Leo was asleep upstairs, safe in a bed that no one would ever take him from again. Monica sat at her desk, her shoulder bandaged, her eyes clear. She opened her laptop and typed a single command. The last of the Vanguard servers went dark, their data erased, their legacy of digital violence ended. She closed the lid. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace.